Chicago, 1893. The growing Midwestern metropolis is 22 years removed from the Great Chicago Fire and is on the eve of becoming the next booming American economic and cultural superpower. Now home to over 1 million people, Chicago will be out to prove their place among world cities and extend their influence as the turn of the century drew near. But how would it happen? 3 words: the Columbian Exposition. This World Fair would change Chicago forever, drawing over 27 million visitors in a 6-month period. The economic, architectural, and cultural identity of the city would be formed forever, altering the course of American history. In 1893, America was in the middle of its Gilded Age. Industry was booming, and technology was rapidly improving, driving America into the 20th century. However, this gave way to a giant class conflict. The rich industrialists became all-powerful, while the lower class suffered through great poverty that ran rampant through the streets of these developing cities. While many suffered through this time period, it gave rise to a new era, one in which Americans could be proud of their heightened status among global innovators. Recognizing the great opportunity to display the brilliant nature of a new American culture, political and economic leaders turned to the use of an exposition as a way to show off all they as a country had accomplished. Congress decided to center the fair around a celebration for the 400th anniversary of Columbus discovering America. This came with the hope that the fair didn't turn out like the Philadelphia Exposition in 1876, an event resulting in a fiscal disaster. The race to hold the exposition began right away. St. Louis, Washington, D.C., New York, and Chicago all fought to host the event that promised to bring commercial profits and prestige to their respective towns. After little time, the decision was down to 2 cities. New York got an early lead, pledging $15 million to Congress if they got the fair. New York seemed like the obvious choice. It was an already developed city and was established as one of the cultural centers of America. On the other hand, Chicago was still developing and was labeled as an up-and-coming city. However, with the help of influential people such as J.P. Morgan and Cornelius Vanderbilt, Chicago was able to offer a great deal that Congress couldn't refuse. It was the $5 million worth of stock and a substantial amount of money that won Chicago the greatest fair the world has ever seen. It would be by the hands of one man that the design of the World Fair would come to fruition. Exposition Director Daniel Burnham was given the assignment of transforming the then desolate Jackson Park into the greatest festival the world had ever seen. He chose to make architecture and sculptures the highlight of this fair. To do this, he had to hire the best artistic minds of his era, one of which was Frederick Law Olmsted, who undertook the responsibility of designing the fair's main grounds, palatial exhibition, and much, much more.
Olmsted. He was a visionary, often known as the father of American landscape architecture. He set a goal to make his best project yet. His fierceness and uniqueness allowed him to see architecture differently, which is exactly what Chicago needed in order to make it a landmark for the rest of the world to look up to. In many ways, Olmsted mentally mimicked the attitudes of Americans during the Gilded Age.
Olmsted and Burnham filled 630 acres of land with a variety of different buildings, sculptures, and activities. Most of the buildings were designed in the neoclassical style and were white, which is why, when the fair was finished, the area at the Court of Honor was called the White City. This and the fact that this fair was illuminated with hundreds of lights, which was relatively new at the time.
You have to understand how cool this event was for Chicagoans. Just imagine a dark city illuminated by nearly gaslights. That's what people were used to at the time. Now imagine walking around the corner into the Grand Fair and seeing white buildings everywhere.
Burnham and Olmsted were responsible for the construction of the Palace of Fine Arts, now the Museum of Science and Industry, the World Congress Building, now the Art Institute, and other large-scale projects in preparation for the fair. Other projects included the Administration Building, the Manufacturers and Liberal Arts Building, and the Agricultural Building.
Your city has a world remember you. It's where your dreams come to life. But you must not delay. Plan quickly, build quickly, or be beaten quickly. Will you build a city that will last forever? Will you be my hero?
Game of Steel.
While Burnham was developing his blueprints for the exposition grounds and buildings, Davis and his team of directors tackled the equally monumental task of giving form to the millions of exhibits that would go on display. The Midway Plaisance was finished. It was a mile-long avenue that ran at the right angle of the White City and blended education with amusement. As if the task of creating one of the greatest spectacles in history isn't hard enough, Burnham and Olmsted were pushed on harsh time restraints. On top of that, they faced the arduous task of building everything on top of rough, marshy land, something that is not very easy to do.
So this fair was immensely popular, okay? So people left their factories, their farms, the city business to participate in what was touted as the greatest cultural and entertainment event in the history of the world. See, some even came around the world to see the spectacles. Henry Adams once stated, "I am puzzled to understand this final impression left on the average mind. As to the inward meaning of this dream of beauty, of course, I don't understand it. But then again, I don't understand anything."
Europe was the standard by which the United States looked up to. The large emphasis on education through the exposition was a proud piece of American improvement. America exemplified how far it had come in 400 years. They attempted to convey that the nation was no longer brash and youthful, but cultured and educated.
It was like something out of a storybook. No one thought it could be done. The first Ferris wheel was also an attraction for many people. Legend has it was designed at a Chicago restaurant while having dinner, and not a single change was made to the original sketch. Yet even for experienced engineers and architects like George Ferris, constructing this was no small feat. In fact, they worked many long, hard months until they finally capitalized on the Ferris wheel for $600,000. It ended up being one of the greatest attractions of the Chicago Fair and is one of the most remembered events for entire Chicago history.
Other landmark structures include the World Congress Building, which would later become the Art Institute, and the Field Columbian Museum, which would become Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History. So these structures, unlike many others, would be retaining following the fair's close. Many structures, in fact, were purposefully burned to ground after fair. These buildings were only temporary and were not built to withstand the winter elements of Chicago long term. Essentially, much of the West City was an illusion, with many famous works of architecture being disposed of in the end.
Some of the innovations displayed include the first ever motion picture, demonstrations of long-distance calling, and the light bulb. Milton Hershey also came up with the idea for his chocolate company, and the first diet sodas were on display. The Chicago Fair gave way to some of the most important modern-day innovations, including Aunt Jemima syrup and juicy fruit. The fair also introduced the idea of a theme park and paved the way for future places like Disneyland and Disney World. The holiday Columbus Day was created as was the Pledge of Allegiance for students all across America to repeat before the beginning of the day. These are just a few of the cultural traditions that rose from the fair in the White City. If one thing's for sure, this was a fair, and it took place in Chicago.
Michael, dinner!
Oh, got to go!